A former casino manager just told me something that every gambler needs to hear, and what I'm about to share with you could be the difference between walking away with life changing money and losing everything to a legal loophole that casinos exploit every single day. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened when I won $127,701 and the casino refused to pay me. What they did next will make you question everything you know about casino fairness, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all started. It was a Thursday evening around 8:45 at a major strip property in Las Vegas that I'm not going to name directly just yet. I'd been playing for about 2 hours on a machine I'd walked past 100 times before, a Buffalo Grand Progressive. I started the night with $200, nothing crazy, just my usual entertainment budget. The first hour was unremarkable, the kind of steady drain that every slot player knows, watching your balance tick down slowly with the occasional small win to keep you interested. Then something shifted. Around the 90-minute mark, I hit a bonus round that paid $630. My balance jumped from $85 to just over $700. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of cashing out like I normally would, I increased my bet from $2.20 per spin to $8.80. I've learned over the years that when a machine starts paying, sometimes you need to press your advantage. 20 minutes later, I hit another bonus that brought my balance up to $1,400. I was feeling good, that specific kind of confidence that comes from being up significantly. The machine had a rhythm to it, the reels were landing in patterns that felt promising. I stayed at 880 per spin, watching the progressive jackpot meter above the machine tick slowly upward. It was sitting at $127,698. I'd looked at that number a dozen times that night, doing the mental math that every gambler does, imagining what that kind of money would mean. Then it happened. Spin number 243 of my session, I watched the first reel lock with a grand symbol. My heart rate picked up. Second reel, another grand. The third reel seemed to spin for an eternity before it locked. Grand! Fourth reel, same thing. When that fifth reel stopped, and I saw the final grand symbol lock into place, my entire body went numb. The machine made a sound I'd never heard before, a building crescendo of chimes and digital fanfare. The screen exploded with animations. Then the machine locked completely, and the display showed a number I'll never forget. $127,701.16. The lights on top of the machine started flashing in rapid sequence. Other players in the row turned to look. A woman 2 machines down actually stood up and started clapping. I couldn't move. I just sat there staring at the screen, my hands shaking, trying to process that this was real. A slot attendant appeared within 30 seconds, which should have been my first clue. These people usually take 5 minutes to show up for a hand pay, but she was there almost instantly. She looked at the machine, then at me, then back at the machine. Her expression changed in a way that I didn't understand at the time. The smile that had started to form on her face flattened into something neutral, almost concerned. She pulled out her radio and said something I couldn't quite hear, but I caught the words slot supervisor and grand jackpot. She asked me to stay seated, told me they needed to verify the win, which I expected. That's standard procedure for anything over $1,200. What wasn't standard was what happened next. 3 minutes later, a man in a dark suit arrived, along with another attendant. They didn't congratulate me, they didn't shake my hand. The man introduced himself as the slot supervisor and said they needed to check the machine before processing the payment. He used words that seemed carefully chosen, technical language about verification protocols and diagnostic procedures. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. We need to run a full diagnostic. This is going to take a little while. That's when things started to go wrong. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I sat at that machine with the screen still frozen on my jackpot amount, watching casino employees speak in hushed tones a few feet away. The slot supervisor had been joined by 2 more people, one of them carrying what looked like a diagnostic tablet. They'd opened the machine's front panel and were examining something inside while occasionally glancing at me. Other players had moved on, the initial excitement fading into awkward curiosity as they walked past and saw me still sitting there, waiting. At the 43-minute mark, a different man approached. He was older, probably in his late 50s, wearing a suit that looked more expensive than what the others were wearing. He introduced himself as the slot director and asked if we could speak privately. The way he said it wasn't a request. Security had appeared at some point, two men in blazers standing a respectful distance away, but clearly present. I followed the slot director to a small office just off the casino floor, my legs unsteady, that jackpot number still burned into my vision. He sat down across from me and folded his hands on the desk. "We have a problem with this jackpot," he said. His tone was measured, almost sympathetic, which somehow made it worse. He explained that their diagnostic check had revealed what he called a machine malfunction. He used technical language I didn't fully understand. Something about a random access memory error that occurred during my spin. He turned a computer monitor toward me, showing a screen full of error codes and timestamps that meant nothing to me, but looked official enough to be intimidating. Then he pointed to something I'd never paid attention to before. There was a small placard on the side of every slot machine, text so tiny you'd need to lean in close to read it. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of it from my machine. The relevant section was highlighted. Malfunction voids, all pays and plays. He let that sink in for a moment before continuing. Because of this malfunction, he explained, they couldn't honor the jackpot. They would, however, return my balance from before the spin, the $1,400 I'd built up. And as a gesture of goodwill, they'd add $200 in courtesy play credit. I sat there trying to process what he was telling me. $1,400. I just won $127,000, and they were offering me $1,400. The slot director slid a printed incident report across the desk, 2 pages of dense text with signature lines at the bottom. He explained that this documented the malfunction and the resolution, and if I signed it, they'd process my payment immediately. I could take my $1,400 and the play credit and continue enjoying my evening. I asked to see written documentation of the malfunction. He gestured to the incident report in front of me, saying that was the documentation. I asked specifically about the diagnostic data, the technical proof that something had actually gone wrong with the machine. He said that information was proprietary, internal diagnostic data that they couldn't share, but I could trust that their technicians had thoroughly examined the machine and confirmed the error. When I asked if I could take a photo of the diagnostic screen he'd shown me, he said that wouldn't be possible. It was already cleared from the system. The way he said it, calm and final, made something click into place. This wasn't a conversation. This was a script he'd performed before. I asked what would happen if I didn't sign the incident report. He leaned back in his chair and said I was certainly within my rights to refuse, but their position wouldn't change. The machine had malfunctioned. The win wasn't valid. If I wanted to pursue it further, I could contact the Nevada Gaming Control Board, but he wanted me to understand that these cases took months, sometimes years, and they rarely ended in the player's favor. He said this with the kind of certainty that comes from experience, from watching people take that $1,400 and walk away rather than fight. He slid the paper closer to me. "We're actually being generous by offering you anything," he said. "The machine wasn't functioning properly when you hit that combination. Technically, we could void everything, including your balance." His eyes stayed on mine, waiting. I looked at that signature line, at the words that would make this all go away, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not defeat, not acceptance, but anger. Pure, clarifying anger at being told that a machine that had happily taken my money for 2 hours was suddenly broken the moment it owed me something back. I told him I needed a minute to think. He said I could take all the time I needed, but his tone suggested otherwise. I stood up, walked out of that office, and went directly back to the machine. It was still sitting there with the screen frozen, that number still glowing like a promise that was being actively broken. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. The machine display showing $127,701. The machine identification number stamped on the metal frame. The denomination indicator, the serial number plate. I took a video walking around the entire unit, narrating the time, the date, the location, and the casino. Other players glanced over, probably wondering what I was doing, but I didn't care. A security guard approached and asked if there was a problem. I told him I was documenting my win before the casino erased the evidence. He said I needed to stop recording. I asked if there was a law against photographing slot machines. He hesitated, then said he'd need to check with management. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. I kept recording. I opened my Players Club app and took screenshots of my session history, showing every spin, every win, the exact timestamp of the jackpot. I photographed the diagnostic screen they'd shown me earlier, which was still visible on one of the technician's tablets sitting on top of the machine. I wrote down the names from the ID badges of every employee who'd been involved. The slot attendant who first responded, the supervisor, the director, even the security guard standing nearby. Then I did something the slot director clearly wasn't expecting. I called the Nevada Gaming Control Board from right there on the casino floor. I'd Googled their number while taking photos, found their enforcement division hotline. When someone answered, I said very specific words that I'd rehearsed in my head 3 times to make sure I got them exactly right. I'm reporting a disputed jackpot at a licensed gaming facility, and I'm requesting an independent machine inspection before any alterations are made to the device. I gave them the casino name, the machine number, the jackpot amount, and my Players Club number. They told me to stay on the property if possible, that an investigator would contact the casino within the hour and gave me a case number to reference. The change in atmosphere was immediate. The slot director, who'd been watching from near his office, walked over with an expression that had shifted from patient authority to something harder to read. He asked who I'd been speaking with. I told him. He was quiet for a moment, then said he'd need to make some calls. Suddenly, he was willing to provide me with a written incident report, the actual documentation I'd asked for earlier. Suddenly, they wanted to review the internal surveillance footage with me present. Suddenly, the security guards became more professional, less hovering, as if someone had reminded them that this was now an official matter under regulatory scrutiny. Within 20 minutes, I had a gaming attorney on the phone. I'd found him through the Nevada State Bar's referral service, explained my situation in under 2 minutes, and he said he could take my case. His first question was whether I'd signed anything. When I said no, I could hear the relief in his voice. He said he'd send a legal hold letter to the casino within 2 hours, which would prevent them from moving or altering the machine, require them to preserve all surveillance footage from the past 72 hours, and demand complete diagnostic logs and maintenance records. He explained that most gambling attorneys work on contingency for jackpot disputes this size, typically 33 to 40% of whatever we recovered, which meant his interests were aligned with mine. He asked if I could afford a small retainer of $1,500 to cover immediate filing costs. I said yes. His next words were the first thing that made me feel like I wasn't fighting this alone. You did everything right. The documentation you gathered in the first hour is worth more than most people collect in weeks. Gaming control involvement means they can't just wait you out. And that phone call you made from the casino floor, that created a paper trail they can't erase. You just brought a legal team to a fight where they expected you to bring nothing. He told me to expect a timeline of 3 to 6 months minimum. That settlement was more likely than court, and that the casino's typical strategy would be to make me doubt myself until I accepted less than I deserved. Then he said something that I'd repeat to myself dozens of times over the next several months. They dispute jackpots because it works. Most people don't know their rights, can't afford to fight, or don't want the stress. But you're not most people anymore. Within 4 hours of hitting that jackpot, I had photographic evidence of everything that mattered, a gaming control case number, and legal representation with a formal hold letter being drafted. But the casino wasn't done fighting. What they did next almost made me give up entirely, and what I discovered about their so-called malfunction would blow this case wide open in ways I never expected. The gaming control investigation began immediately, but immediately in regulatory terms meant a timeline measured in weeks, not hours. The investigator assigned to my case contacted the casino that same night, but the formal impound of the machine didn't happen until 3 days later. During those 3 days, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that jackpot number on the screen, and every time I opened them, I wondered if the casino was somehow altering evidence despite the legal hold. My attorney assured me that gaming control's involvement made that nearly impossible, but the doubt ate at me anyway. The machine was transported to a secure facility where gaming control performs forensic analysis on disputed gaming devices. According to the investigator, they would pull every log the machine had generated in the past 90 days, test the random number generator under controlled conditions, examine every component that could have affected game outcome, and review surveillance footage synchronized with the machine's internal timestamps. He explained this process typically took 4 to 6 weeks for a case of this complexity. 4 to 6 weeks of waiting while the casino remained completely silent, which my attorney said was strategic, a calculated move to let anxiety do their work for them. The first 2 weeks were the hardest. I started second-guessing everything. What if they were right about the malfunction? What if I'd misunderstood what happened? What if the machine really had glitched in some way I couldn't see? My attorney had warned me this would happen, that self-doubt was part of the casino's strategy, even when they weren't actively doing anything. Just the waiting itself became a form of pressure. I was checking my email every hour, calling my attorney every few days for updates he didn't have yet. The costs were mounting too, even on contingency. Filing fees, documentation requests, administrative expenses that I had to cover up front. By week 3, I'd spent almost $4,000 on a case that might not go anywhere. Then something shifted. My attorney called me on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks and 2 days into the investigation. His voice had a different quality to it, sharper, more energized. Gaming Control's preliminary findings had come through, and there were what he called significant inconsistencies in the casino's malfunction claim. The specific error code the casino had cited, the random access memory refresh error, was a minor diagnostic flag that occurred relatively frequently on that model of machine. More importantly, it was a display-level error that had no connection to the random number generator or the game's outcome determination. It was the electronic equivalent of a flickering light bulb, visible but functionally irrelevant to whether the machine was operating correctly. The machine's internal logs told an even more interesting story. Every slot machine generates thousands of data points during operation, recording every spin, every outcome, every diagnostic check, every door opening, every bill inserted. These logs showed that my machine had passed its automated diagnostic check at 5:37 that afternoon, just over 3 hours before my jackpot. There was no record of any critical error between that diagnostic and my win at 8:51. The RAM refresh error the casino cited had occurred, but it had happened 6 minutes after my jackpot, not during the spin that generated it. The timestamps were irrefutable. Whatever minor glitch they were pointing to as justification had nothing to do with my win. Week 5 brought the formal findings, and with them, the smoking gun I hadn't known existed. Gaming Control's review of the machine's maintenance records revealed that my Buffalo Grand unit had paid out 4 other jackpots over $25,000 in the previous 8 months, an unusually high frequency for a single machine. The casino had flagged it internally as what they called a high payout unit. More damning were the internal emails Gaming Control had subpoenaed as part of their investigation. There was a message from the slot director to the casino manager, sent 3 minutes after my win was registered in their system, before any diagnostic had been performed. The subject line read, "Another grand on Buffalo 2847." The body of the email was 4 words that changed everything. This is the 5th time this year we need to invoke the clause. The surveillance footage corroborated every detail of my account. The machine operated normally before my win, during my win, and after my win. There were no visible display errors, no unusual behavior, nothing that would indicate malfunction to anyone watching. What the footage also showed was the deliberation among casino staff, the conversations and radio calls that happened before anyone ever looked at a diagnostic screen. The timestamps proved they'd made the decision to dispute the jackpot before they'd gathered any evidence to support that decision. They'd worked backward from the conclusion, finding a minor error code to justify a predetermined outcome. Gaming Control's official conclusion was delivered in a 4-page report that my attorney read to me over the phone. No evidence of machine malfunction affecting game outcome. Random number generator operated within certified parameters. Win combination was legitimately generated and displayed. Casino's invocation of malfunction clause appears unwarranted based on available evidence. The report recommended that the casino pay the jackpot in full, though it included a disclaimer that this recommendation was not legally binding enforcement, merely an official finding. The casino's response came 2 days later. They maintained their position despite the findings, claiming that Gaming Control didn't understand their proprietary diagnostic standards, that their internal experts had identified issues the investigation had missed. Then came their new settlement offer, $75,000, 59% of what they owed me. The message was clear: take it or spend years in court fighting us. My attorney said we had 2 options, and the one I chose surprised even him. What happened in the next 30 days would not only get me paid, but change how this casino handled disputes in ways that would affect every player who came after me. ASCII 5. My attorney laid out the 2 paths in front of me with the kind of clinical precision that lawyers use when they want you to understand they're giving you facts, not recommendations. The first option was straightforward: accept the $75,000 settlement. The money would be in my account within 10 business days. I'd sign a release, probably including a non-disclosure agreement, and walk away with more than half of what I'd won. No court dates, no depositions, no risk of losing everything if a judge decided the casino's interpretation of their malfunction clause had merit. He reminded me that litigation was expensive and uncertain, that even with Gaming Control's findings in our favor, we'd be looking at 12 to 18 months of legal battle with no guarantee of outcome. The second option was to file the lawsuit and go public with the story in a way that stayed within legal and ethical boundaries. He explained that we had what he considered a 70% probability of winning the full amount in court, but the real leverage wasn't the lawsuit itself. It was transparency. Casinos operate on reputation and regulatory goodwill. They don't fear individual lawsuits nearly as much as they fear public scrutiny combined with regulatory attention. If I was willing to tell my story publicly while the case was active, to share the Gaming Control findings that were part of the public record, to speak to media outlets that covered gambling issues, we could create pressure that a lawsuit alone never would. I asked him what he'd do. He said that wasn't a fair question because he wasn't the one who'd spent 4 months fighting this, wasn't the one who'd invested $4,000 in costs with no guarantee of return, wasn't the one lying awake at night wondering if standing up to a casino was going to end in financial ruin. But then he added something that made the decision for me. He said that in his 15 years handling casino disputes, he'd watched dozens of people accept reduced settlements for the same reason. They were tired, they were scared, and they didn't think they could win against an institution designed to outlast them. And every single person who'd taken that settlement had called him months later with the same regret. Not about the money they'd left on the table, but about letting the casino prove that their strategy worked. I chose option 2, but I modified it in a way my attorney hadn't suggested. I would file the lawsuit, but before any court dates were set, I'd use public pressure as strategically as possible. I started by posting my complete timeline on 3 major gambling forums, leaving out the casino's name initially, but including every verifiable detail. The Gaming Control case number, the investigation findings which were public record, the timeline from win to dispute to investigation. I posted photos of the documentation I'd gathered, the machine display, the case number, the attorney correspondence. I wrote it factually without embellishment, focusing on the process rather than the outrage. The response was immediate and bigger than I'd anticipated. Within 48 hours, my post had been shared across a dozen gambling communities. Other players started coming forward with their own disputed jackpot stories, and a disturbing pattern emerged. At least 7 people reported similar experiences at the same casino property, all involving progressive jackpots over $50,000, all disputed using technical malfunction claims, all settled for fractions of the original amount. 2 of them still had documentation. One had surveillance footage from his phone showing the exact moment casino staff decided to dispute his win before checking any diagnostics. A local news reporter reached out on day 3. She'd been following gambling industry issues for years and said my case had every element of a story her audience needed to hear. Clear documentation, regulatory findings, and a pattern of behavior that suggested institutional practice rather than isolated incident. I agreed to an on-camera interview with one condition. Everything I said had to be fact-checkable and legally defensible. My attorney sat in on the interview, and every time I made a claim, I provided the documentation to support it. The story aired 6 days after I'd made my first forum post. The quote they used in the broadcast was one my attorney and I had crafted carefully. "I'm not anti-casino. I gamble regularly and I understand the odds. But I'm pro-fairness. If a machine is certified to accept my money, it should be certified to honor my wins." What Gaming Control found wasn't a malfunction that affected my jackpot. What they found was a casino using technical language to avoid paying what they owed. The story ended with the reporter noting that the casino had declined to comment, citing pending litigation. The social media response was immediate. A hashtag started trending in Las Vegas gambling communities, and suddenly my case wasn't just about me anymore. It represented something larger: the power imbalance between casinos and players, the fine print that protects institutions while exposing individuals, the regulatory gaps that allow disputes to be settled quietly in ways that favor the house. My attorney said his phone started ringing with calls from other disputed players, some with cases going back 3 years, all asking if there was still time to reopen their settlements. 14 days after the news story aired, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was someone from the casino's corporate office, not the property-level management that had been handling my case, but their regional vice president of gaming operations. His tone was different from every casino employee I'd spoken with before. Professional, direct, and notably absent of the talking points about malfunctions and proprietary diagnostics. He said the company had reviewed my case at the corporate level, had examined the gaming control findings, and wanted to discuss a resolution. He offered to pay the full jackpot amount of $127,701, plus reimbursement of my documented legal fees. The only conditions were standard tax documentation and a release stating that payment constituted full settlement with no admission of wrongdoing on the casino's part. I asked about the non-disclosure agreement. He said that given the public nature the case had already taken, they weren't requiring one. I asked about the timeline. He said 7 business days from a signed agreement to funds transfer. My attorney, who was on speakerphone, asked about the other disputed players who'd come forward with similar cases from their property. There was a long pause before the vice president said those were being reviewed separately by their legal team, but he could say that new protocols were being implemented for all jackpot disputes over $50,000, including mandatory independent gaming consultant review before any malfunction claim was filed. The settlement was processed exactly as promised. $127,701.16 appeared in my account 9 days after I signed the agreement. The legal fee reimbursement of $8,400 came through 3 days after that. My total out-of-pocket cost for the entire 4-month fight was approximately $400 in filing fees and administrative costs that fell outside the reimbursement terms. From the moment I hit that jackpot to the moment I received full payment, 4 months and 3 days. Write the final act now. Act 6. Act 6. But here's what I really want you to know, what kept me up at night even after the money hit my account, even after the fight was over. There are patterns in how casinos handle these disputes that nobody talks about openly, institutional practices that exist in the space between legal and ethical, and if you ever hit a significant win, Understanding these patterns could be the difference between getting paid and walking away with nothing. The statistics that former industry employees shared with me after my case went public were staggering. According to analysts who track gaming industry trends, major casino operations dispute approximately 2 to 3% of all jackpots exceeding $50,000. That might sound like a small number until you consider the volume. We're talking hundreds of disputes annually across Nevada alone, thousands nationally. What's more disturbing is that an estimated 65 to 75% of players who face these disputes accept reduced settlements. They take half, sometimes a third of what they won, because fighting seems impossible. The average settlement when a jackpot is contested works out to about 55 to 60% of the original amount, and only 8 to 12% of disputed wins ever reach actual litigation. Of the cases that do make it to court, players win approximately 60 to 70% of the time, which tells you something important about how strong the casino's legal positions actually are when challenged. A former gaming attorney I spoke with explained why casinos dispute legitimate wins, despite knowing they'll probably lose if pushed. The financial incentive is enormous. If they dispute 100 jackpots worth $10 million total, and 75 players settle for an average of 60%, the casino just saved $3 million. Even accounting for the 25 players who fight and might win, even factoring in legal costs and regulatory scrutiny, the math works in the casino's favor. They're not disputing your jackpot because they genuinely believe the machine malfunctioned. They're disputing it because the strategy is profitable. They're counting on your financial pressure, your lack of information about your rights, your fear of years in court, and your exhaustion with the process. The malfunction clause that appears on virtually every slot machine in North America was originally created to protect casinos from genuine technical failures, situations where a machine's random number generator actually malfunctioned in a way that produced an outcome that shouldn't have been possible. But that clause has been increasingly weaponized, used not for its intended purpose, but as a legal shield whenever a payout is large enough to justify the dispute. The key distinction that most players don't understand is the difference between a display error and a random number generator error. A display malfunction, something wrong with how the machine shows information, doesn't affect the actual game outcome. The RNG already determined your result before the reels even stopped spinning. But casinos will point to minor display glitches, memory refresh errors, door sensors, bill validator communication issues, anything that generates a diagnostic code, and claim it affected game outcome when the technical reality is that these errors are almost always irrelevant to whether your win was legitimate. If you ever find yourself in this situation, in that moment when casino staff starts using words like malfunction and verification and proprietary diagnostics, you need to act immediately. Do not leave the machine. The moment you walk away, they can reset it, and physical evidence disappears. Take photos of everything: the machine display showing your win, the machine identification number, the serial number plate, any diagnostic screens they show you. Record video of the locked machine state with the win amount visible. Screenshot your player's club app showing your session history. Write down the names and titles of every employee who interacts with you. This documentation needs to happen in the first 30 minutes, before they have time to alter anything, before your memory gets fuzzy about details, before the adrenaline wears off and doubt creeps in. Then say these specific words, and say them clearly. I'm requesting an independent gaming control inspection of this machine. Follow that immediately with, please provide written documentation of any claimed malfunction before any resets are performed. Then add, I do not consent to any machine reset until regulatory review is complete. If your state allows single-party consent recording, tell them you're recording the interaction for accuracy. These phrases do something crucial. They shift the situation from a customer service issue to a regulatory matter. They create an official record. They put the casino on notice that you understand you have rights. Within 24 hours, file a formal complaint with your state's gaming regulatory authority. In Nevada, that's the Gaming Control Board. In New Jersey, the Division of Gaming Enforcement. In Pennsylvania, the Gaming Control Board. Every gambling jurisdiction has oversight, and these agencies exist specifically to mediate disputes between players and casinos. Request a formal machine inspection in your complaint. Get a case number. That case number is your insurance policy against the casino simply waiting you out or pressuring you into accepting whatever they offer first. Then contact an attorney who specializes in gambling disputes. Most state bar associations have referral services. Search for casino jackpot dispute attorneys in your specific state because gaming law varies significantly by jurisdiction. Many of these attorneys offer free initial consultations, and for jackpots of significant size, most work on contingency arrangements, typically 33 to 40% of whatever you recover. The attorney's first action should be sending a legal hold letter to the casino, which prevents them from moving or altering the machine, requires preservation of all surveillance footage, and demands complete diagnostic logs and maintenance records. This establishes that you have legal representation, which changes how the casino approaches negotiations entirely. Do not discuss your situation on social media immediately. Wait until your attorney advises you on strategy. Premature posting can sometimes hurt your case by giving the casino ammunition, or by creating statements they can use against you later. Save public pressure as a strategic tool to be deployed at the right moment, not as an emotional outlet in the immediate aftermath. Your attorney will know when transparency becomes leverage. Prepare yourself psychologically for what comes next, because the casino will send multiple settlement offers, each one framed as their final offer, each one accompanied by artificial deadline pressure. They'll tell you this is as high as they can go, that if you don't accept within 48 hours, the offer is withdrawn, that litigation will take years and cost you everything. None of this is true. Settlement negotiations in casino disputes typically involve 4 to 6 offers before reaching resolution, and each successive offer is almost always higher than the one before it. The first offer is designed to test whether you know your rights. The second offer is designed to test your resolve. Only after you've demonstrated both knowledge and commitment do you start seeing offers that approach fair value. Through your attorney, request specific documentation. Complete diagnostic logs for the 72 hours surrounding your win, all maintenance records for that machine going back 90 days, surveillance footage from multiple angles, and all internal communications regarding your jackpot. Casinos are required to preserve this information once a formal dispute is filed, and reviewing it often reveals exactly what happened in my case, that the decision to dispute came before the evidence to support it. If I had accepted that first offer they made, the $1,400 and the apology that wasn't really an apology, I would have lost $126,000. But because I knew these steps, because I documented everything in those critical first 30 minutes, because I involved gaming control before the casino could control the narrative, because I had legal representation that spoke their language, I got every penny I'd won. The process took 4 months and tested every bit of patience and conviction I had, but it worked because the system does work when you know how to use it. Casinos count on you not knowing your rights. They count on your fear, your exhaustion, your assumption that fighting a multi-billion-dollar corporation is impossible. A former casino executive told me something after my case settled that I think about often. We settle disputed jackpots when players know what they're doing. We fight when they don't. That statement reveals everything about how these situations actually work. It's not about the merits of their malfunction claim. It's about whether you understand that you have power in this situation, that regulatory oversight exists for exactly these disputes, that attorneys will take your case because they know casinos often lose when challenged, and that documentation and procedure matter more than the size of their legal department. Save this information. Share it with anyone you know who gambles regularly. Screenshot the steps I've outlined, because the next person this happens to might be someone you care about, and knowing what to do in those first 30 minutes could save them everything. If this helped you understand what to do if a casino ever refuses to pay a legitimate win, let me know in the comments. Tell me if you've ever had a casino dispute and how it turned out. And if you found value in hearing the real story of what it takes to fight back and win, subscribe, because there are more stories that need to be told about what really happens behind the scenes in this industry. The casinos don't want these conversations happening. That's exactly why they need to.